The British establishment is in absolute chaos right now. King Charles has just made a move so explosive, so utterly unprecedented, that it sent shockwaves through Westminster and left Keir Starmer's government scrambling for survival. What you're about to hear will fundamentally change everything you thought you knew about the monarchy's role in British politics. The royal family just threw their weight behind a political movement that threatens to demolish the entire Labour project, and Starmer's response has been nothing short of volcanic. This isn't just another political spat. This is a constitutional earthquake that could reshape Britain for generations to come. The question everyone's asking right now is simple. Has the King just ended Keir Starmer's career before it even began? The timeline of events reads like something out of a political thriller, and yet it's all happening right now in real time. Just 48 hours ago, King Charles attended what was supposed to be a routine charity event in the Midlands, one of those carefully choreographed royal appearances that usually generate nothing more than a few pleasant photographs and some local news coverage. But something went catastrophically wrong for the Labour government during this visit, something that has left political analysts absolutely stunned and government insiders in a state of near panic. During what should have been a perfectly innocuous conversation with local business owners and community leaders, the King made remarks that have been interpreted as a direct endorsement of Reform UK's economic policies, specifically their proposals on immigration control and their vision for post-Brexit Britain. Now, you might be thinking that's impossible, that the monarchy stays strictly neutral in political matters. And you'd be right to think that under normal circumstances, but these aren't normal circumstances, and the evidence of what actually happened is causing absolute pandemonium across the political spectrum. Multiple witnesses at the event have now come forward, and their accounts are remarkably consistent. The King reportedly expressed what several attendees described as enthusiastic agreement with concerns about current immigration levels and their impact on local services and housing. He allegedly nodded approvingly when one businessman outlined Reform UK's policy proposals, and here's where it gets truly explosive. He apparently made specific reference to the need for politicians who put British interests first, a phrase that anyone following British politics will immediately recognise as core Reform UK messaging. Within hours of these conversations, video footage began circulating on social media, carefully edited clips that appear to show the King in animated discussion with known Reform UK supporters, smiling and engaging in ways that palace officials would normally avoid like the plague during politically sensitive conversations. The palace's initial response was to dismiss the entire thing as a misunderstanding, claiming the King's remarks were taken out of context and that he maintains strict political neutrality as required by constitutional convention. But that defence started crumbling almost immediately when a respected journalist from a major broadsheet published detailed notes from a source who was actually in the room, notes that corroborated everything the initial witnesses had claimed and added even more damaging details. The political implications of this moment cannot be overstated. Reform UK, the party that's been steadily climbing in the polls and eating into both Conservative and Labour support, suddenly has something no insurgent political movement in modern British history has ever possessed: apparent royal approval. Nigel Farage, never one to miss an opportunity, held a press conference within 24 hours where he stopped just short of claiming an explicit endorsement, but made absolutely certain that every journalist in attendance understood the significance of the King's remarks. He stood there with that characteristic grin and laid out exactly what this means for British politics, pointing out that when the King of England expresses concern about the same issues Reform UK has been campaigning on for years, perhaps it's time for the establishment to start listening to what millions of ordinary British people have been saying all along. The footage of that press conference has already been viewed millions of times. And the comment sections across social media are absolutely exploding, with people interpreting this as confirmation that even the royal family recognises that the current political system is failing Britain. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn for Keir Starmer and the Labour government. Internal polling data that leaked from Labour headquarters just this morning shows that the perception of royal endorsement, whether real or manufactured, has caused a catastrophic collapse in Labour support among key demographic groups. We're talking about double-digit swings in constituencies that Labour absolutely must hold to maintain any hope of a functioning majority. The numbers are so bad that several Labour MPs have privately told journalists they're genuinely worried about losing seats they have held for decades, seats that were supposed to be absolutely safe under any reasonable political scenario. Think about what that means for a government that's barely had time to implement any of its major policy initiatives. Starmer came into office with big promises about rebuilding Britain, about restoring trust in politics, about creating a new partnership between government and the people. And now, less than a year into his premiership, he's facing an existential crisis triggered by what amounts to a few conversations at a charity event. The Conservative Party, desperate to remain relevant after their historic electoral defeat, has sensed blood in the water and is now trying to position themselves as the reasonable middle ground between Labour's perceived failures and Reform UK's insurgent populism. But nobody's really buying it because everyone can see that the Conservatives are yesterday's news, a party that lost the trust of the British people and has no clear path back to power. The real battle now is between Labour's establishment vision and Reform UK's promise to fundamentally reshape how Britain is governed. And the perception that the monarchy might be leaning toward the latter has completely scrambled the political calculus that every analyst was working with just a week ago. Senior Labour figures are appearing on news programmes, trying to downplay the significance of the King's remarks, insisting that royal neutrality remains intact and that voters should focus on policy substance rather than palace gossip. But you can see the panic in their eyes, you can hear the desperation in their voices because they know that perception often matters more than reality in politics. And right now the perception is that even the King doesn't believe in Keir Starmer's Britain. Keir Starmer's response to this crisis has been absolutely extraordinary and not in a good way for his political survival prospects. The Prime Minister emerged from Downing Street yesterday evening for what was clearly an hastily arranged statement, and what came out of his mouth has left constitutional experts absolutely horrified and political opponents gleefully sharpening their knives. Instead of taking the diplomatic route, instead of carefully navigating the constitutional sensitivities involved in any perceived conflict between the elected government and the monarchy, Starmer came out swinging with what can only be described as a full-throated attack on King Charles himself. The Prime Minister stood at that podium, visibly angry, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury, and accused the King of engaging in political interference that threatens the very foundations of British constitutional democracy. He didn't use careful diplomatic language. He didn't couch his criticism in respectful terms. He essentially savaged the monarch in a way that no British Prime Minister has done in living memory. Starmer's central argument was that the King has violated his constitutional duty to remain above politics, that by appearing to endorse Reform UK's positions, he has dragged the monarchy into partisan political debate in a way that is fundamentally incompatible with a constitutional monarchy. The Prime Minister went further, suggesting that if the King cannot maintain proper political neutrality, then perhaps it's time for a serious national conversation and about the role of the monarchy in modern Britain. Now let those words sink in for a moment, because what Starmer just did is threaten the institution of the monarchy itself over what his own palace sources initially described as a misunderstanding. This is a Prime Minister essentially saying that if the King doesn't stay in his lane, the government might need to consider reducing the monarchy's role or even questioning its continued existence. The audacity of that position is absolutely staggering, and the political backlash has been swift and brutal. Conservative MPs are having an absolute field day with this, calling Starmer's remarks disgraceful, unconstitutional, and proof that Labour has completely lost touch with British values and traditions. They're pointing out that the British people have tremendous affection for the monarchy, that King Charles is widely respected despite some earlier controversies, and that attacking him over what amounts to expressing concern about issues that millions of ordinary citizens share is political suicide. Reform UK has gone even further, with Nigel Farage delivering what might be the speech of his political career, a barnstorming condemnation of Starmer that frames the Prime Minister as an anti-British radical who would rather attack the King than address the legitimate concerns of the British people. Farage stood in front of cameras and painted a picture of a prime minister so ideologically committed to mass immigration and globalist policies that he's willing to trash Britain's most cherished institutions when they dare to question his agenda. The footage has gone absolutely viral, shared millions of times across every social media platform, with comment sections filled with people expressing shock and disgust at what they perceive as Starmer's unprecedented disrespect for the Crown. But here's what makes this whole situation even more politically toxic for Labour. Polling conducted in the immediate aftermath of Starmer's statement shows that the British public is siding overwhelmingly with the King over the Prime Minister. We're talking about numbers that should terrify anyone in the Labour Party who cares about electoral viability. Roughly 70% of respondents said they believe the King has every right to express concern about issues affecting Britain, while only 18% agreed with Starmer's assertion that the King violated constitutional neutrality. Even more damaging, 62% of respondents said that Starmer's attack on the King made them less likely to support Labour in the next election. Those are catastrophic numbers that suggest Starmer has managed to turn a potential palace misstep into a full-blown crisis of his own leadership. Political strategists from across the spectrum are looking at these numbers and concluding that Starmer has committed an unforced error of historic proportions, that he's managed to unite the British public against him on an issue where he should have simply stayed quiet and let the palace controversy blow over. The Labour Party itself is starting to fracture over this issue in ways that suggest deep internal problems beyond just this immediate crisis. Several backbench MPs have publicly distanced themselves from Starmer's comments, with at least 3 issuing statements expressing their continued respect for the monarchy and their belief that the Prime Minister overreacted to what should have been handled through quiet diplomatic channels. There are whispers, still unconfirmed but coming from usually reliable sources, that senior cabinet members privately urged Starmer not to make such an aggressive public statement, that they warned him it would backfire spectacularly, and that he ignored their advice because he was too angry to think strategically. If those reports are accurate, and there's good reason to believe they are based on the patterns we're seeing, then what we're witnessing is a Prime Minister who has lost control of his emotions and possibly his political judgment at a critical moment. One unnamed Labour MP told a journalist that the party is heading for electoral oblivion if Starmer doesn't find a way to walk back his comments and repair relations with the palace. But at this point, it's hard to see how he does that without looking weak and indecisive after such a strong public position. The constitutional implications of this confrontation are genuinely profound and concerning to anyone who cares about British democratic traditions. We have a sitting Prime Minister essentially threatening the monarchy because of perceived political interference, while simultaneously the monarchy appears to have violated its own principles of neutrality by seeming to favour one political movement over the elected government. This is uncharted territory in modern British politics, a genuine constitutional crisis that has no clear resolution because both sides have arguably crossed lines that shouldn't be crossed. Constitutional experts are publishing op-eds warning that this standoff could fundamentally damage both institutions, that the monarchy's perceived bias undermines its claim to represent all British people regardless of politics, while the Prime Minister's aggressive response undermines the traditional respect and cooperation between Crown and Government that has characterised British constitutional monarchy for generations. Some are even suggesting that we're witnessing the beginning of the end of the current constitutional settlement, that this crisis will force Britain to confront questions about the monarchy's role that politicians have successfully avoided for decades. Reform UK is absolutely capitalising on this chaos in ways that are transforming the entire political landscape of Britain. Nigel Farage and his team have recognised that they've been handed a golden opportunity, a moment where the political establishment is tearing itself apart and leaving a massive opening for an insurgent movement that promises to sweep away the old order and rebuild British politics from the ground up. The party's polling numbers have exploded in the week since this controversy erupted, with some surveys now showing Reform UK in second place nationally, ahead of the Conservatives and closing the gap with Labour at a rate that has establishment politicians genuinely panicking. We're seeing swings of 15 to 20 points in certain constituencies, movements in voter sentiment that normally take years to develop happening instead over a matter of days. This isn't just a polling bounce that will fade when the news cycle moves on. This appears to be a fundamental realignment of British politics, accelerated by the perception that even the King recognises the current system isn't working. The messaging from Reform UK has been absolutely pitch perfect for this moment, threading the needle between respecting the monarchy and attacking the government in ways that resonate with huge portions of the electorate. Farage has been careful not to claim explicit royal endorsement, understanding that would likely trigger a palace response that could undermine the entire narrative. But he's made absolutely certain that voters understand the significance of the King expressing concerns about the same issues Reform UK campaigns on. The party's social media operation has been flooding platforms with content that juxtaposes the King's reported remarks with Reform UK policy positions, letting voters draw their own conclusions about the alignment without making claims that could be easily disputed or debunked. It's sophisticated political communication that shows how far Reform UK has come from its early days as essentially a single issue Brexit party. This is now a professional political operation that understands how to exploit opportunities and shape narratives in the modern media environment. What's particularly devastating for the established parties is how Reform UK is expanding beyond its traditional base in ways that threaten both Labour and Conservative seats across the country. The party is making serious inroads with working class voters who traditionally supported Labour, people who feel abandoned by a party that they believe has become too focused on metropolitan liberal concerns and not focused enough on issues like immigration, housing costs and community cohesion that directly affect their daily lives. These are people who might have voted Labour their entire lives, whose parents and grandparents voted Labour, who considered themselves part of the Labour movement, but who now feel that the party has left them behind. The King's perceived concerns about immigration and national sovereignty have given these voters permission to consider alternatives, to think that maybe it's not racist or backwards to want controlled immigration and to prioritise British citizens in housing and services. Reform UK is welcoming these voters with open arms, telling them that their concerns are legitimate and shared even by the King himself, that they're not extremists for wanting policies that put British interests first. But Reform UK isn't just taking voters from Labour, they're also completing the destruction of the Conservative Party by absorbing the right-wing voters who stuck with the Tories through their last disastrous years in government. These are traditional Conservatives who believe in nation, family and sovereignty, who watched in horror as successive Conservative governments failed to control immigration despite repeated promises, who feel betrayed by a party that talked tough on the campaign trail and then governed like Liberals once in office. The perception that the King, the ultimate symbol of British tradition and continuity, might have concerns about the current direction of the country has validated these voters' choice to abandon the Conservatives for Reform UK. They can now tell themselves and their friends that they're not being disloyal to Conservative principles by supporting Reform UK. They're actually being faithful to those principles by supporting the only party serious about implementing them. The Conservative Party, caught between trying to win back these voters and not wanting to alienate more moderate supporters, has effectively paralysed itself with contradictory messaging that satisfies nobody. The electoral math is becoming increasingly nightmarish for anyone trying to stop Reform UK's momentum. Under Britain's first past the post system, you don't need to win a majority of votes nationally to win a majority of seats in Parliament. You just need to win more votes than anyone else in individual constituencies, with the votes splitting between Labour, Conservatives, Liberal Democrats and various smaller parties. Reform UK is discovering that they can win seats with 35 or even 30% of the vote in three-way or four-way races. Electoral analysts are now modelling scenarios where Reform UK could win 100 seats or more in the next election, enough to either form a government in coalition or to be such a large opposition that they effectively control the political agenda. Some of the more dramatic projections, admittedly based on current polling that may not hold, show Reform UK potentially winning an outright majority if the current trends continue and intensify. That scenario seemed absolutely impossible just months ago, the stuff of political fantasy that serious analysts would dismiss out of hand, but now it's being discussed openly as a genuine possibility, a potential outcome that would represent the most dramatic political transformation in British history since the rise of the Labour Party itself a century ago. The policy platform that Reform UK is running on has evolved significantly from its Brexit-focused origins into a comprehensive vision for Britain that combines immigration control with economic nationalism and a promise to restore what they call traditional British values. They're proposing a complete moratorium on non-essential immigration for 5 years to allow integration and to reduce pressure on housing and services. They want to leave the European Convention on Human Rights to prevent foreign courts from overruling British deportation decisions. They're calling for massive investments in British manufacturing and technology funded by redirecting foreign aid spending and reducing the international development budget. They want to end what they call woke ideology in schools and government, replacing it with civic education that emphasises British history and values. And critically, they're promising a royal commission on the future of the monarchy that would protect and strengthen the institution against political interference, a direct shot at Starmer's threats, while positioning Reform UK as the defenders of British constitutional traditions. This platform is resonating with millions of voters who feel that Britain has lost its way, that mass immigration has changed communities beyond recognition, that traditional values are under attack, and that the establishment parties are more concerned with international opinion than with the welfare of British citizens.